So let's go to the concepts part. So here what you see is, now be with me and be attentive. It's quite complex to understand this. Okay. I know I'm again and again using the word complex. I don't want to intimidate you guys, but I'm just stating it. Okay. Anyways. So the thing here is, let's understand blockchain technology by understanding how Bitcoin network works. Okay. So what happens in a Bitcoin network is, what you see in the diagram above is a transaction flow. We won't be going into the details of this because, as I stated, we are just the scope of this session is to just understand at a very, very high level what is blockchain. Very high level. Okay. I just wanted to introduce you to blockchain technology today. Okay. So what happens here is, in the Bitcoin network, if you have to see, uh, someone requests for a transaction. Transaction is what? Sending some currency from one end to another, from one person to another person. And the textbook example of that is sending Alice wants to send Bob some currency. Okay. So someone wants to send some bitcoins to someone. So what happens here is, there is a proposal which is made. That is a request for a transaction which is made. Now, as I stated, it doesn't have any kind of central entity, bank or anything where the transaction will go to and the transaction will get executed, etc., and so on and so forth. So what happens here is, it goes to all the participants in the network. There are many participants who are there in the network. Okay. Now these participants, what they do is, these participants take this transaction, validate the transaction, and they propagate it ahead. Do you understand the meaning of validation of a transaction? That is, whether this particular transaction is correct or not, whether this particular transaction is eligible for execution or not. Okay. So basically, everyone in the network checks the transaction and propagates it out. Propagation meaning, if I, as a participant in the network, now just try to understand this. Blockchain is comprised of a blockchain network, a Bitcoin network is comprised of multiple participants who are connected directly with each other. Okay. So there is a big network of, you can call that, they are called as nodes. Nodes, Nodes. They're called as nodes. So there is a big network of nodes which are connected with directly with each other, who are upholding, who are hosting this network. Okay. No central entity is hosting the network. People are hosting the network. Okay. Something that you can relate to is BitTorrent. All of you guys might have used it. BitTorrent is not hosted by some central server. It is a peer-to-peer network. Okay. Some similar basis. This is also like that only. So all these participants which are there, they receive this transaction, they validate the transaction, then they propagate it ahead. And all the participants won't trust each other. They will validate and propagate. They will be doing the validation at the independent level. They won't trust that if from where they're getting the message, that particular participant says that this is a valid transaction, they won't trust it. They will again validate the transaction. So you see, there is a validation process which happens multiple times. Security aspect is provided. Second, what happens is, these valid transactions are collected by a special kind of node. They're called as miners. Okay, they're called as miners. Just put it in your mind. They're called as miners. Okay, so there are many miners in the network. Okay. So what happens is, these miners start collecting these transactions and then they try to put it into a data structure. You guys understand the data structure, like linked list. Okay. So there's a data structure called as block. Blockchain ka block part. Block. So block kuch nahi hai, data structure. Imagine it's like a container. Okay. So what happens in this is, you have a block in which all the transactions are fed in by the miner, and Bitcoin works on something called as a game theory. Basically, if you have to put this particular block, which has all the transaction ahead into the network, you have to solve some kind of a puzzle, which is computationally intensive. Game theory kya hai? There is a competition, there is a difficulty. For example, racing, right? 2 kilometers is the target, 15 minutes is the difficulty. Basically, you have to run 2 kilometers in 15 minutes. That's the target of the competition. Okay. Similarly, Bitcoin also works on something called as a game theory, wherein whenever they want to form the block, whenever they want to form the data structure by collecting all the transactions which are there in the network, okay, they have to solve a puzzle which is mathematically intensive, computationally intensive. Okay, whoever is able to solve the puzzle first, even if it sounds oversimplified, it is very complex to solve the puzzle, and it is purely computational efforts. There is no smart work to it. Okay. there's a lot of computational power which goes in. That particular, where whoever in the miners, as I state, there are multiple miners who are competing with each other. Whoever is able to solve the puzzle first will put the block ahead into the network first. It will get again validated. Every participant in the network, every node in the network will take that block, validate that block, whether really he has solved the puzzle or not, and then validate the transactions within it again. So there is two-step of validation which happens. One at the individual level, the second at the data structure level, that is a block level. Okay. If that particular block is considered valid, that particular node will propagate to the adjoining nodes. The adjoining nodes again will validate everything in the block and then propagate it ahead. And then they store the blocks as well into something called as the ledger. Okay, we'll be seeing what that ledger is. Okay, there's nothing but records. Ledger case like you have a register, right? I think you guys understand what is a ledger. Is there anyone who doesn't understand what's a ledger? Okay, so I hope everyone understands what's a ledger. So that particular block goes into the ledger, and when the majority of the network has accepted that a particular block, that block is considered to be confirmed. The transaction within that block is also considered to be confirmed, and that's how a transaction cycle, basically a transaction flows from one end to the other. Okay, from the proposal to transaction completion. Okay, so now I'm going to read out a definition to you guys. I'm not going to explain the definition much. We'll be coming back to this definition. It's basically like an exercise for you if you're able to crack it well and good. Okay. So blockchain is a distributed ledger which is shared across a peer-to-peer computing network. Each computer node in the network holds a copy of the ledger. So there is no single point of failure. Every piece of information is mathematically encrypted. You guys have heard about hashing? Guys?
So heard about it, but never actually like comprehended it.
Okay, so it's
Never
basically
understood it completely.
okay. So it's a cryptographic method which is there. I guess everyone understands cryptography. Okay, so hashing is a kind of cryptography which cryptographic method which enables you to create a digital identity for your digital data. You can research on that part. Or as I stated, we don't have that much time to go into the details. So just understand the mathematical encryption is taken care by hashing. Okay. So there is some. So what happens is with the mathematically encrypted and added as a new block to the chain of historical records, various consensus mechanisms are used to validate a new block with other participants before it can be added to the chain. This prevents malicious actions without requiring a central authority. Now, what I'm going to do here is we are going to cover some of the aspects which are mentioned in the definition, and again we'll come back to the definition. Let's see whether it makes sense or not. Okay. Now let's come to the first aspect, that is the network architecture. So as I've been stating, it should not have any kind of central entity in between. Okay. So if we are Satoshi Nakamoto and we want to implement Bitcoin, so what sort of network topology will we be using? Okay. So here you can see the three basic types of network topologies which are there: centralized, decentralized, distributed. In the centralized network architecture, it is basically a client server architecture. You have a server in between, you have multiple clients which are attached to the server. So what happens here is, as the definition says, server provides, client consumes, right? The problem with this is if the centralized server goes down, the entire network is down. None of the clients are able to interact with each other. They are not able to get any services out of it. If it gets compromised, again, there is a single point of failure. Okay. The best example I would say, which we all have faced, is whenever the results are declared. Whenever the results are declared, you try to access your results. So many students are trying to access the same server. You are not able to get your results in real time. It takes like around about at least 4 tries, I guess. After 4th or 5th trial, you get your results. And I hope everyone has experienced this. I know that. Anyways, okay. So this is the centralized network architecture, this thing. So obviously, we cannot have a centralized architecture for Bitcoin, for blockchain. Okay. Now let's come to decentralized architecture. When you come to decentralized architecture, what happens is you have a main server in between and you have multiple sub-servers which are there. And you have clients attached to these sub-servers. So what happens here is even if one of the sub-servers go down, only those clients are affected, but the other part of the network is not affected. But what happens here is these clients are not able to interact with any other clients because this particular server is down. And if the sub-server goes down, the entire network is down. Still, single point of failure was not able to be overcome because of decentralized network topology. It doesn't suffice my need. Okay. So what we'll do is, let's look at the third part. That is the third type of network topology, that is distributed network topology. So what happens in distributed network topology? There is no client, there is no server. There are only peers in the network. All participants are directly connected with each other. Okay. So even if one of the participants go down, do you really think the network will go down? Do you see any kind of a hierarchy in this distributed network topology? You have only peers who are directly connected with each other. So even if one or two peers go down, still the network is still up and running. Okay. So blockchain uses peer-to-peer network topology. It uses distributed computing network topology. Now the question, definition, and all those things which I've been stating it is decentralized, and now I'm saying it is distributed. It's simple. Logically, it is decentralized because it doesn't have any kind of central entity sitting in between. There is no authority in between. That's the reason in general English, when we say that it is a decentralized network. But technically, it uses distributed computing network because it uses peer-to-peer network, which is, as per computer science, a distributed computing technology. So technical implementation is using distributed computing network, but the logical part, when we speak about blockchain, we call it decentralized, as logically decentralized, because it doesn't have any kind of central entity. So the first aspect is clear, right? It uses a peer-to-peer network. The network architecture for any kind of a blockchain network is peer-to-peer. Okay. Now the ledger part. The ledger is nothing but the record, that is the database which is maintained. That's the records which are maintained. So if you take the example of Bitcoin, when Bitcoin transactions are happening, don't you think those transactions have to be recorded somewhere? There has to be a log which has to be maintained, right? Of all the transactions which are happening in the network, right? So tell me, if you have a network which is peer-to-peer, okay, which is where participants are directly connected with each other, do you really think you can have a centralized approach of keeping the ledger? Do you guys think so? It's possible?
Sir, it will be needed to share the whole thing to everybody for every transaction.
Yes. The entire ledger has to be maintained by everyone in the network. Okay. So if the ledger is maintained by everyone in the network, even if one or two peers go down, do you think the ledger is affected? Do you think the transactions will get affected? Because the ledger is available with other participants in the network, right? Don't you think so? So there is no central point of failure. First of all, if the network architecture is peer-to-peer, you cannot have your ledger keeping process in a centralized manner. It happens in a distributed manner. That is why it is called a distributed ledger. That every participant in the network has a copy of the ledger. Okay. Now the question that arises here is, how do they come to an agreement? Okay. Now there has to be a point, right? Like where all the participants have to agree that this is the copy of the ledger. So what happens? Do you guys understand the terminology consensus? Now, what is consensus? Okay. Consensus meaning is that everyone has to accept to come to an agreement that this is okay. Everyone agrees that this is something that we'll go ahead with. And in the case of a Bitcoin network, everyone has to agree that the copy of the ledger is the same among everyone else in the network. Okay, then and only then there is integrity, right? If the copies are varying, do you think the network has integrity? No. The network will only have integrity if all the copies are same. And to do so, the entire network has to come to a consensus. Consensus meaning an agreement. Okay. Now I'll take a very funny example, which I guess most of you guys might have gone through. Okay. So I just want one or two people to just to confirm to this so that others also accept. Okay. So the thing here is, if you want to go to Goa, okay, you want to go to Goa, most of the time it gets cancelled. So what you do is, like, your friends are in different places, different cities or different colleges. So the first thing that you do is that you create a WhatsApp group. Okay? You create the WhatsApp group. There are 6 people who want to go for this particular trip. And in this WhatsApp group, what happens is, just a minute. Okay. So in this WhatsApp group, what happens is that everyone puts across their dates, right? When they want to go. That's what happens, right? Everyone agrees to this. guys.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. आप लोग अपने डेट्स डालते हो ना कि भाई हाँ ठीक है ये डेट है मेरे को ये डेट मेरे लिए सूटेबल है ये डेट मेरे लिए सूटेबल है बट अगर सब लोग ने डिफरेंट डेट्स दिया डू यू थिंक द प्लान विल बिकम रियल एनी टाइम सून एवरीवन हैज टू कम टू वन सिंगल डेट राइट कि हाँ ठीक है दिस इज द डेट व्हिच इज अग्रीएबल बाय एवरीवन ठीक है दिस व्हाट इज हैपनिंग हियर डोंट यू थिंक यू आर कमिंग टू अ कंसेंसस कि हाँ ठीक है दिस इज द डेट व्हिच इज okay with everyone of us in the group so yes then we can go ahead with the plan do you think so don't you think hum log we actually been using this terminology we actually been having consensus throughout our life for a lot of things wherever there is a group involved yes or no let it be going for a movie let it be going out let it be going for a trip or anything is there if you're going as a group you need to decide the time you need to decide the date and everyone has to agree on it and jab majority ne bol diya to fir aapko karna hi padega like if one or two are left around you have to follow so blockchain follows the majority rule remember I said if the majority accepts the block the transaction is considered to be confirmed same way here as well if majority says so that this particular block is confirmed then everyone has to just follow along okay so this is the word this is the terminology of consensus associated with blockchain okay clear you guys understood the terminology consensus terminology samajh mein aaya
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So to reach to the consensus of going to Goa, which was a consensus mechanism that you used? Consensus mechanism was what? WhatsApp group, messaging. ये consensus mechanism हुआ ना? How did you come to a consensus? Similarly, in blockchain, if they want to come to a consensus, there has to be a mechanism which has to be followed. Okay? So that is implemented in the technical layer itself. Remember, I stated there is something called as a game theory. Whoever wins the puzzle first gets to add the block add in the network, gets to add the block to the network. Remember, I stated in the transaction flow.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that particular puzzle solving, okay, that particular game theory, वो एक consensus mechanism है. उससे क्या हो रहा है? Whoever is able to solve the puzzle first, don't you think उसका block will get propagated faster than anyone else who comes afterwards? Do you agree to this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There are different kinds of consensus mechanisms which are there. When you will be exploring, you will coming to know about different consensus mechanism. Bitcoin uses something called as proof of work. कि आपने puzzle solve किया वो proof करना है, ठीक है? That is why it's called as proof of work. Okay. So what did we understand till now? That the network architecture of blockchain is peer-to-peer. Agreed? Agreed? Yeah. The second part. The ledger keeping process, the record keeping process happens in a distributed fashion and it is called a distributed ledger. Agreed?
Yes, sir.
Everyone has to come to a consensus that this is the copy of the ledger, right? Everyone has to come to an agreement because it's a big group, right? There is no central person sitting in between. Okay, so basically it is like this if you have to imagine. एक बार अगर यूनिवर्सिटी ने डेट्स डिक्लेयर कर दिया फॉर एग्जाम्स do you really think you can go and question or discussion होता है क्या तुम लोग के साथ नहीं ना even if you are a part of the what is it education system तुम्हारे साथ थोड़ी ना डिस्कस करेंगे हाँ भैया बताओ कब एग्जाम रखना है आपका ऐसा थोड़ी ना पूछने वाले they'll just keep it whenever they want it right so in the case of blockchain you cannot have the same approach because you don't have such an entity sitting in between it's all participants who are directly connected with each other ठीक है so वहां पे सबका agreement लेना necessary है ठीक है so that's called consensus and the process through which you reach to the consensus is called consensus mechanism in the case of Bitcoin it's proof of work and majority of the blockchains follow proof of work okay so evolution क्या क्या हुआ मैं बताता हूँ the first evolution was what the cryptocurrency part 1.0 was all about cryptocurrency that is Bitcoin agreed obviously it started with Bitcoin so obviously it is 1.0 2.0 क्या हुआ था anyone can tell me what it was मैंने history में थोड़ा cover किया था yeah, exactly 2.0 में क्या हुआ it went beyond currency right you are able to create your own applications and that happened with Ethereum 3.0 में क्या हुआ you guys heard about Hyperledger right so the thing here is are you able to relate what all things happened like first currency then happened that you are able to create applications based on this technology so 3.0 mein obviously what happened was enterprises like real life use cases which are there supply chain okay, banking finance healthcare e-governance these are the different domains which are there they started to adopt blockchain technology and that happened in 3.0 okay And Hyperledger, मैंने यहाँ पे डाला नहीं है, but Hyperledger is one of the blockchain platforms. Remember, there are many blockchain platforms which are there, which are either in 1.0 or in 2.0 or have come to 3.0. 3.0 में basically it's all about enterprise level solutions. It's nothing about currency. It's nothing about application based on those currencies. It's purely about whatever was happening in the industry in the traditional way can become better if you have blockchain technology implemented into it, happened in 3.0. Okay.